All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into the housing market and the U.S. debt situation.
Okay.
And we've got some interesting insights from Dave Kranzler,
Okay.
a precious metals analyst featured on Silver Bullion TV.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we keep hearing about this cooling housing market,
Right.
supposedly due to lack of inventory.
Yeah.
But is that really the whole story?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question.
And how does the U.S. government's, enthusiastic approach to spending play into this whole thing?
Right.
I have a feeling we might uncover some surprises here.
Yeah, I think so too. I
Yeah.
think Kranzler's take is really interesting.
Okay.
For example, he argues that we're not just looking at a cooling market,
Okay.
but a full-blown crash driven by an affordability crisis.
A crash. That's pretty strong language.
Yeah.
What makes him say that?
He points to the fact that, real incomes are falling,
Yeah.
while home prices have been, until very recently, at all-time highs.
Right.
And it's basic math, really. If your paycheck can't keep up with the cost of housing,
Yeah.
something's gotta give.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
It's like trying to buy a car when the price of gas has tripled.
right, exactly.
Suddenly that new vehicle doesn't seem so attainable.
Yeah.
So how does this affordability crisis actually impact the housing market?
Well, Kranzler describes it as a logjam.
Okay.
So people who might normally be looking to sell their homes and upgrade,
Mm-hmm.
they can't afford to do that. So
Okay,
they're
right.
kind of stuck,
Okay.
which means those homes aren't hitting the market.
Right.
So that leads to fewer homes being available,
Yeah.
which ironically can keep prices artificially high
Right.
and worsen the affordability problem.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this vicious cycle.
So it's not necessarily that there aren't enough houses being built,
Right.
but that the ones that people are living in aren't being sold because nobody can afford to move.
Yeah,
That's a really interesting distinction.
exactly. And Kranzler also points out that simply cutting interest rates, which is often the go-to solution for stimulating the economy,
Right.
won't actually solve the problem.
Okay.
In fact, he argues that it could make inflation worse. Lower rates make it cheaper to borrow,
Right.
which can lead to more spending.
Yeah.
And potentially drive prices up even further.
So if it's not really about a shortage of homes,
Yeah.
why are we constantly bombarded with this lack of inventory narrative?
Right.
I'm starting to feel like those headlines are only telling part of the story.
Yeah, it does seem that way. And Kranzler brings up some surprising data to back that up.
Okay.
Did you know that home builders are currently sitting on a 13-month supply of finished homes?
13 months.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a shortage at all.
No, not at all. So what's going on there?
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, there are a few possible explanations.
Okay.
Home builders may be holding back inventory
Okay.
to maintain the illusion of scarcity, which helps keep prices high.
Right.
But Kranzler also notes that the inventory of existing homes is actually rising, particularly in some markets,
Okay.
where Airbnb properties are flooding back onto the market
Oh, interesting.
as short-term rentals become less profitable.
Okay, so I'm starting to see the cracks in this lack of inventory story.
Yeah.
Are there any other signs that this narrative might be misleading?
Yeah, Kranzler points out that a large percentage of listed homes are
What?
seeing price cuts, which also suggests that the supply is outweighing the demand.
Interesting.
So while the headlines might scream shortage,
Yeah.
the reality on the ground appears to be quite different.
This is giving me a lot to think about, especially if I were in the market to buy or sell right now.
Right.
What do you make of all this? What is potential oversupply something that buyers should be aware of?
It's definitely a factor to consider, especially if Kranzler's predictions about a market correction are accurate.
Okay.
But we can delve deeper into the potential implications for buyers and sellers a bit later.
Okay.
For now, let's shift our focus to another potentially alarming trend.
Well, U.S. national debt.
Ah, yes, the elephant in the room.
Exactly.
Kranzler doesn't hold back when he describes the government's spending habits.
No, he does not.
He shared a statistic that really stopped me in my tracks.
Okay.
In July of 2024, a full 25% of government expenditures
Wow.
went toward interest payments on the national debt.
It's incredible.
A quarter of all government spending just on interest.
Yeah.
Is that even sustainable?
That's a good question, and the answer, unfortunately, is probably not.
Okay.
And it highlights the very real danger of what's often called a death spiral.
Okay.
So the U.S. government relies heavily on borrowing to fund its operations.
Right.
But the more it borrows, the higher the interest payments become.
Right.
Which in turn requires even more borrowing.
Yeah.
It's a precarious situation.
So what happens when the bill finally comes due?
Well,
can the government just keep kicking the can down the road forever?
Realistically, no. At some point, something has to give.
The problem is that making significant spending cuts is incredibly difficult from a political standpoint.
Yeah.
Which politician wants to tell their constituents
Right.
they'll be getting smaller Social Security checks or reduced Medicare benefits.
Yeah.
It's a tough sell, to say the least.
Yeah. Definitely a tough sell.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a tough
And like we're all on this massive ship,
Right.
and the captain just keeps taking on more and more debt to keep the engines running.
Yeah.
But nobody wants to address the fact that we might be headed straight for an iceberg.
Right.
So with all this talk about economic uncertainty and potential storms on the horizon,
Yeah.
it makes sense that people would be looking for safer harbors.
Exactly.
Kranzler seems to think that precious metals, especially gold,
Right.
have a key role to play in this environment.
Yeah, he definitely does.
Okay.
And there are some interesting trends in the precious metals market that support his view.
Okay. Like what? Well, for instance, gold recently broke out of a long-term cup and handle formation.
A cup and handle formation.
Yeah. So imagine like a chart of gold's price over time.
Okay.
A cup and handle formation looks like, well, a cup with a handle, indicating a period of consolidation followed by a potential upward breakout.
Okay.
And gold has surged past $2,180 an ounce since then.
Wow.
Silver is showing similar strength,
Okay.
potentially following a similar path.
So are precious metals becoming kind of a safe haven in a world where currencies seem a lot less stable?
Many investors seem to think so, particularly in the Eastern Hemisphere.
Okay.
We're seeing countries like China and Russia aggressively accumulating gold while simultaneously selling off their dollar-denominated assets.
Really?
Which suggests a growing lack of confidence in the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency.
That's a significant shift, isn't it?
It is.
It sounds like the financial landscape is undergoing some major tectonic shifts.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment.
Kranzler even goes so far as to predict that a gold-backed currency might emerge from the East, potentially sidelining the West in global trade and finance.
Right.
That's a pretty radical idea, isn't it?
It is, but it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility.
Okay.
Consider this. The Eastern Hemisphere holds a significant portion of the world's population, manufacturing capacity, and natural resources. If they were to move away from the dollar and create their own gold-backed system, it could have a profound impact on global trade and finance. So we might be witnessing the early stages of a major realignment of economic power.
Wow, this is a lot to take in.
It is.
We've gone from a potential housing market crash to a global currency shakeup.
Right.
All in one conversation.
Exactly.
I think it's time to pause for a moment and digest all of this.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But there's still so much more to explore.
There is.
What's next on our deep dive agenda?
Well, in the final part, we'll examine what all of this means for your personal financial future.
Okay.
We'll look at the potential implications of these trends.
Okay.
And explore some practical strategies for navigating this complex economic landscape.
That's the question I'm sure is on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
We'll get to that right after a quick break.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we're back.
We are.
And ready to tackle the big question.
Right.
You know, we've explored these potential economic headwinds.
Yeah.
A possible housing market correction, the looming U.S. debt crisis,
right,
and even a potential shift in global currency dominance.
Yeah.
It can feel a bit overwhelming, to say the least.
It certainly is a lot to process.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that, knowledge is power.
Right.
Understanding these trends is the first step in making informed decisions about our own financial futures.
So how can our listeners apply what we've learned? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's one thing to talk about these, global forces.
Right.
But what can we actually do about it?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And while there's no one-size-fits-all answer,
okay,
I think the most important takeaway is this.
Okay.
Start thinking critically.
Okay.
About your financial future. Don't just accept the mainstream narrative.
Right.
Or rely solely on conventional wisdom.
So do your own research.
Exactly.
Dig deeper. Don't be afraid to question the status quo.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Challenge assumptions. Explore different perspectives.
Yeah.
And most importantly, take action.
Okay.
Don't let fear or inertia paralyze you.
So Kranzler as we know, is a big proponent of precious metals, especially in times of economic uncertainty. He sees them as a hedge against inflation and a store of value.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, precious metals can certainly play a role in a diversified portfolio. They have historically served as a safe haven during times of economic turmoil. And given the current landscape, it's understandable why many investors are considering them.
But it's not like a guaranteed slam dunk, is it?
No, of course not.
There are always risks involved.
Right. There are always risks associated with any investment.
Right.
And it's crucial to do your due diligence before making any investment decisions. Precious metals aren't a magic bullet, and their prices can fluctuate. But if you're looking for ways to hedge against inflation and potentially preserve capital in uncertain times, they're worth considering.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Understanding your own risk tolerance. And making informed choices that align with your personal financial goals.
Right.
And that brings us back to Kranzler's analysis of the housing market.
Okay.
Yeah, he paints a rather concerning picture.
He does.
Of an affordability crisis.
Right.
And a potential correction on the horizon.
Yeah.
So what are the practical implications of that?
Well,
for our listeners, especially those thinking about buying or selling a home?
If Kranzler is correct about this potential oversupply of housing hitting the market, it could create some opportunities for buyers, particularly those who have been priced out in recent years.
So if prices start to come down, it could be more attainable for people to enter the market.
That's a possibility. But it's important to remember that a housing market correction isn't always a smooth ride. Prices could fluctuate. And there's always the risk of buying at what you think is a low point, only to see them drop further.
So what's the key takeaway for potential home buyers in this environment?
I would say focus on affordability above all else. Don't get caught up in the frenzy of trying to time the market perfectly. Make sure you're buying a home at a price that you can comfortably afford, even if the market were to decline further.
So be a smart investor, not a speculator.
It's about making sound financial decisions based on your individual circumstances and long-term goals. What about those thinking about selling their homes? They must be a little nervous hearing all this talk of a potential correction.
It's understandable to feel some concern, but it's crucial to keep things in perspective. A correction doesn't necessarily mean a crash. It could simply be a period of adjustment where prices stabilize or even decline slightly before resuming a more sustainable growth trajectory.
So less about panicking. And more about adjusting expectations.
Exactly. It's all about making informed decisions based on the best available information, understanding the risks involved, and not letting fear dictate your actions.
That's great advice for any aspect of personal finance, really.
It is.
And speaking of fear, we've talked a lot about potential economic turmoil and uncertainty. Is there anything positive to glean from all of this?
That's a good question. Are there any opportunities that might arise from these shifts?
I think one potential silver lining is that periods of disruption often lead to innovation and creative solutions. When the old ways of doing things no longer work, people are forced to think outside the box and find new ways to adapt and thrive. This could be a time for entrepreneurs to emerge with new ideas and for individuals to reevaluate their priorities and create more resilient and fulfilling lives.
It's about embracing change,
Yeah, exactly.
Seeing challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation.
Precisely. And that brings us back to one of the key themes we've been exploring, the potential shift in global power dynamics. If the Eastern Hemisphere does embrace a gold-backed currency, and the West is slow to adapt, it could reshape the global economic landscape in profound ways.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It is.
But it's also incredibly fascinating to think about the possibilities. It feels like we're on the cusp of a new era.
It certainly does. And I think the most important thing for all of us is to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious. Keep asking questions. Keep seeking knowledge and never stop exploring the possibilities. The future is unwritten, and it's up to all of us to shape it.
Well said. Well, thank you for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
Into the world of unpayable housing,
right,
a spiraling national debt,
yeah,
and the potential rise of precious metals.
It's a lot.
It's been a thought-provoking journey, to say the least.
It really has.
And to our listeners,
yeah,
we encourage you to continue exploring these topics on your own.
Absolutely.
Don't just take our word for it.
Do your own research.
Challenge your assumptions and come to your own conclusions.
Right.
As always, we appreciate you joining us on this journey of discovery.
Yes, thank you.
We look forward to diving into more fascinating topics with you next time.